ACE score explained. Hello, welcome to Sobriety Bestie. In this video, I'm going to be explaining what is an ACE score. ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. We're talking about childhood trauma here, adverse experiences in childhood. So maybe you're wondering, what is a good ACE score? Or how do I know what my ACE score is? Or what are signs of childhood trauma in adulthood? And how does childhood trauma relate to alcoholism? And how does childhood trauma relate to sexual assault later in life? I've timestamped everything below as well, so you can save your time and just go to the section that's most relevant to you or watch the whole video. The CDC and Kaiser recognized that there was a relationship between adverse childhood experiences, or ACE in the ACE scores, and later adulthood experiences with physical health, mental health, learning, and behavior. So an ACE score, or an adverse childhood experience score, is literally a score from 0 to 10 of how many on this scale that they noticed from it was about 17,000 or more, like a little over 17,000 people in their survey that they looked at. These were the most common traumas experienced in childhood. And you get a 1 if you have that experience, or a yes, or a 0, or a no if you don't have it. So you go through the questions that we're going to go through later in this video, and you answer yes or no, and then you count those number of yeses, and that would be your ACE score, or your adverse childhood experience score. These ACE scores include things like abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, or household dysfunction, including mental illness, if a mother is threatened with or treated violently, divorce, incarceration of a relative, and substance abuse. As far as signs of childhood trauma in adulthood, this can look like things like anxiety, depression, addiction, diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, being violent yourself or being a victim of violence, autoimmune disease, migraines. They found an association between higher ACE scores and worse health outcomes. Now, of course, there are a lot of other stressors that can happen in our childhood that can lead to toxic stress that are not directly on this. So this is just a way to look at how stress affects, like childhood stress, childhood trauma affects later development. Now, any experience or any traumatic experience or traumatic stress or toxic stress you experience in childhood of course, has the potential to affect your neurodevelopment, your brain's trajectory and development in life, and your later health outcomes. So they found that there are 3 main areas of the brain that the ACE scores, or the higher these childhood traumas, affect and impact the brain. So number 1, executive functioning. I think of this like the prefrontal cortex, the logical, rational part of our brain. So we notice that we have challenges with focus, attention, solving problems, inhibition, like the ability to not do something. So that means we're more impulsive, reasoning, and learning. So these are some of the areas that could be affected by having these huge stress loads in childhood from the traumatic experiences or the adverse experiences. Another part of the brain that could be affected is our emotional center. So this would get into our ability to recognize and process emotions, emotional dysregulation, and also our ability to control our impulsivity, or our tendency to be more impulsive in our behavior. Another part of the brain that could be affected by this is our memory and our learning. So our ability to learn, form, and retrieve memories. What this really comes down to is our stress system being activated. So we've talked about this a lot on the channel. So we have our parasympathetic nervous system, think rest and digest, right? And our sympathetic nervous system, think fight or flight. And so when we are activated, when we're experiencing adverse experience in childhood or have some sort of trauma, our sympathetic nervous system goes off. We are ready to fight, flight, freeze, fawn, right? We're in that activated sympathetic nervous system. And so when that happens, a whole cascade of stress chemicals, adrenaline, cortisol, and about 30 other stress chemical friends, are released into our system. So we have that stress chemical cocktail released into our system. And that's going to affect, that is our hormones. It's going to affect our neurodevelopment, how our brain develops. It's going to affect our immune system. It's going to affect how we process and experience life day to day. So if we're constantly being flooded with those stress chemicals, it's going to shape our entire life. And then our immune system is being affected, and if this happens long term, it's going to set us up for these later life challenges in our health. So it's really great that you're watching this video and that you're learning more about this for you or a loved one. And at any point in time, we can be on the journey of learning how to calm ourselves down and be more in that parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest, and learn how to calm down our triggers, be triggered less often and less frequency. And when we do that, we reduce that level of toxic stress inside. We begin to heal. The healing happens when we're in our parasympathetic nervous system. When we have that stress system activated, it's not a time to heal. It's a time to fight, flight, or freeze. The saber-toothed tiger is on the scene, right? Our primitive brains, we either need to am I going to eat this guy? Am I going to fight this guy? Or am I going to run away from this guy? That's not when we rest and digest. That's not when we ovulate. That's not when we heal our body. That's when we need all of our resources to save our lives, right? And thank goodness that happened. And our ancestors were the ones who ran or fought, right? And survived. But so when we want to do the healing and the recovery, we need to be in that parasympathetic nervous system. We need to be in that rest and digest. So if we have a high ACE score, and we're about to get into the actual ACE score test and do the test together, when we have a high ACE score, it's not a need to worry. It's more like, the way that I think about it, it's like, no wonder I've been, addicted to alcohol, or no wonder I've been so stressed out, or no wonder why I'm having all these complications, or the doctors can't figure out what's going on with me. I've been stressed my entire life. I've been dysregulated. Like, that to me is like, oh, this makes sense. Like, it's not like, why the addiction, right? Like, what's wrong with you? It's like, what happened to you? Like, something happened and our nervous systems got set on a track. We've been dysregulated with all these stress chemicals. And now our job, if we want, our journey can be to learn how to live with more ease, to set our nervous system up in a different trajectory, and one of more of that rest and digest, that recovery where we can actually recover and have that deep healing, calming experience. All right, ACE score test questions. You might want to pause this video and grab a pen and a paper, or you can just count on your fingers if that works for you. Let's go in. Question number 1. Did a parent or adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you? Or B, act in any way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? These are pretty heavy. So I'm going to keep going. And we're just going to put down a yes or a no. And obviously you can pause this or come back to this video at any time. Number 2. And remember, we're going to add up all of our yeses later. So all the yeses become one of the scores in our ACE score. Number 2. Did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you? Or ever hit you so hard that it made marks or you were injured? 3. Did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have you touched their body in a sexual way, or attempt to actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you? Okay, 4. Did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special? Your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? 5, did you often or very often feel that you, A, didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, and had no one to protect you? Or B, your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you and take to the doctor if needed? 6, were your parents separated or divorced? 7, was your parent or caregiver often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her? Or B, sometimes, often, or very often kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard? Or C, ever repeatedly hit over at least a few minutes or threatened with a gun or a knife? Now remember, like, this said her here. Originally it was about the mother, but this is any sort of trauma, like. And obviously if this was a different gender, it would have a similar impact on our nervous system as little kids. So just take this as a guide and just write your score down, and know that if anything isn't specifically on here, it's still valid for your experience and what you went through. Okay, 8. Did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or an alcoholic or who used street drugs? 9. Was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? 10. Did a household member go to prison? So those are the 10 questions on the ACE score. That is the ACE score explained. That's the ACE test score, right? So go through and add those up, and that would be your total ACE score. So some interesting stats on these ACE scores is that 67% of the humans, of the people in the survey, had at least one ACE score. And 12.6% had 4 or more ACE scores. So if you have a higher ACE score, you're definitely not alone on that. So ideally, we would all grow up in an environment where our ACE score was 0, where we weren't traumatized as far as the experience when we were young. Now, I do want to say that I have noticed personally in my own life, the value of the things that I have been through and the trauma that I have been through grew me into the human that I am today. Like, it's not for nothing. Like, we can transform and grow, right? So while we were victimized at a younger age, we might not need to we don't need to continually live as a victim. You know, we can actually move through a lot of this stuff. So there is a lot of healing available wherever you're at on your journey and your discovery of your ACE score. So for example, if you're following my channel, Sobriety Bestie, because you are currently in an active addiction, or you're sober or want to be sober, or you're looking at your relationship with your addictions in general, it's very common to have a higher ACE score if we fall into the addiction category, right? So an ACE score of 6 or higher is 4,600% more likely to be an IV drug user than an ACE score of 0. So it really is not like what's wrong with you, or it's what happened to you, right? We've been through stuff. And we're coping. There's a direct link with childhood trauma and adult onset of chronic disease, as well as depression, suicide, being violent, and a victim of violence, as we've already discussed. 5 out of 10 of the leading causes of death are associated with these higher ACE scores. As far as alcoholism and childhood trauma, if you have an ACE score of 0, there's a 3% chance of being an alcoholic. An ACE score of 1 is a 6%. These are going up. If you have an ACE score of 2, 10%. Of 3, 11% chance of being an alcoholic. If you have an ACE score of 4 or higher, you have a 16% chance of being an alcoholic. There's a direct relationship with childhood trauma and childhood adverse experiences and later life addictions or alcoholism, alcohol dependency, alcohol use disorder. The other thing I want to mention here, there's a lot of correlations, and I just want to mention a few of them so we get the idea of like, wow, I've been through something. Like, I get to heal now that I'm a grown-up. Right now that I'm an adult, I can actually do my healing work. And to me, it just like sheds a lot of light on like why we might be having the experience of life that we do, right? I want to talk about childhood trauma and sexual assault, childhood trauma and sexual abuse, especially later in life. So this one is pretty intense, I think personally, just because of my own past and experience. And if you've seen my TED Talk, then you understand a bit of my story. I'll link it up here, my TED Talk, if you want to watch it. My TED Talk is, I talk about basically childhood adverse experiences, where I talk about mental health, like specifically anxiety, childhood sexual abuse, and addiction, and then the healing journey from that. So if you have an ACE score of a 0, you have a 5% of the people who had an ACE score of 0 were later raped in life. If you had an ACE score of 1, 10% of those people were raped. If you were an ACE score of 2, 16% of those people were raped. If you have an ACE score of 3, 18%. And if you have an ACE score of 4 or above, 32% of the people who have an ACE score of 4 or above are later raped in life. So you're probably having some of your own conclusions while watching this, and epiphanies or ahas, and please share them in the comments, whatever you feel comfortable with. For me, it's like I really see the importance of healing early on. Like if we can heal, like obviously having no ACE scores is no adverse experiences is the best, but the earlier we can heal, the less likely we're going to stay in that toxic stress load that's going to lead us to these later experiences. Like that can probably bring our probability down and being later harmed, later moving into addiction, later being raped, later having these adverse health impacts on our health. One more thing about the health is that for an ACE scores of 6 and above, there's a 20-year different life expectancy. So if you have a 6 or above, you're estimated to live 20 years less than if you were a 0. And if you are here on my channel because you struggle with alcohol, you have struggled with alcohol like me, you had an alcohol addiction like me, or you're currently struggling with alcohol, I found it interesting that Bill Wilson, the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, has what I read is he has an ACE score of 6. Now, obviously the ACE scores came about like way after, a couple decades after he passed away. But it just shows me that, like, again and again and again, that relationship, another stat that I saw somewhere else is there's an 80% correlation between trauma and addiction. So it really is what happened to you. And then if that's the case, that you do have this trauma in your experience, or you do have this dysregulated nervous system, it's even more reason to go on the journey of learning how to calm yourself down and feel comfortable in your skin, that becomes a priority. So it sucks what happened to us. It fucking sucks, right? And then, but what's more important now to me as like, you know, as a woman who isn't that child anymore in those experiences, it's like, what can I do about it now? How can I live my best life now? How can I heal now? How can I change the trajectory of my life now? And for me, what I found to be most effective is to have a new relationship with my arousal. When I say arousal, if you're used to like sobriety bestie world, right? That's the anxiety, the irritation, the stress, the restlessness, all that stuff that's being activated in my nervous system, the toxic stress, the dysregulation, the sympathetic dominant, all that is arousal, right? That is all arousal. That's the way that I call it. So I need to have a new relationship with my arousal. That's how I have found freedom. Now, look, there might be as many paths to freedom as there are humans, right? But what I have found is that when I relate to my arousal, when I have a new relationship with my arousal, I get free. So I don't have to drink over it. I don't have to smoke over it. I don't have to have some sort of addiction to cover it up. I don't have to be scared of it. I can learn how to relate with my nervous system in a way that is more loving. I wish you much peace and freedom in your healing journey. And I will see you in the next video.